Welcome to Ranting and Raving. The Warriors just won the NBA championship, and rightfully so. Their star player, Steph Curry, a lot of conversation has been about is he or is he not in the top 10. And top 10s are, it gets thrown around in the sports all the time. Top 10s, GOATs, top 5, Mount Rushmore. And what tends to happen with these lists is people are like, yeah, that player is a top 10 player, and they have 17 guys that are top 10 players. Because the thing with the top 10 is, if one guy moves in, somebody's got to move out, because you only got 10. So I decided I love football. I love anime. I love comics. I love fantasy books. I love lists. I think lists are a lot of fun. I just think it's an interesting framework to have a discussion and a debate and to take an analytical approach. Sometimes it's just a fun way to take a subjective approach, which is what we're going to do today. And kind of the difference between the two. If I was taking an analytical approach, there would be numbers attached to the players we're going to look at today, and there aren't. I'm not going to be doing these in order of what I think the 10 greatest players in NBA history are in order. I'll probably do that at some later point. This is just going to be a top 10 list. Who's in, who's out, and a couple of guys that are right on the cusp that I don't have in the top 10, but I do really think deserve to be in that conversation. And there's probably going to be a couple of guys in my top 10 that won't be in yours. So feel free to reach out in the comment section and tell me why you agree or disagree or do or don't have those players in your top 10, and we'll have a fun discussion in the comments about it. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get started with the list here with number one of the honorable mentions. As I said, there are two of them, and the first here is Dr. J. So Dr. J was the league's first star, like major star, production, media. Like Wilt is the first phenomena. Bill Russell is obviously the game's greatest winner. May or may not see both of those guys coming up here. But Dr. J was the star. Dr. J, without Dr. J, you don't have Jordan. Without Dr. J, you don't have a lot. His highlights were incredible, but a lot of people, as you know, and this happens, but as the game goes on and as time moves on, people forget Dr. J was an incredible player. Go check out his stats sometime and check out his performance. Look at what he did in the ABA, which was every bit. It's not an NFL XFL thing. The ABA was every bit the NBA's equal as far as quality of talent, quality of teams, level of performance. They were equals, and Dr. J dominated that league. And then he came to the NBA, and he dominated that league too. And this will be a theme somewhat as I go through this list, but not entirely. Winning rings isn't everything. When you're comparing individual players, if you're just counting championships, it's not a very intelligent way to do it because you can't logically go halfway. You can't say, well, rings is the only thing that matters, and then not accept that means you think that Robert Horry was a better player than Charles Barkley because they play the same position. They're both power forwards. Robert Horry is one of the first stretch fours, not the first. There were several before him, but one of the first of that new wave. So you can't have one without the other without really just admitting that you're kind of picking and choosing things to fit the narrative that you want to have, which is not what we're going to do here today. So anyway, Dr. J, first honorable mention, just outside of the top 10. Unbelievable career, incredible player, great guy. Like obviously I've never met the guy, but you see him in interviews, you see the way he carries himself, you see the way he's carried himself for 50 some years, and just the ultimate ambassador for the game. Like I said, the first real superstar for the game, and a tremendous player, a winner. One of the 5 or 6 best dunkers of all time. Just an absolute great. So he's without question needs to be mentioned, even though he didn't make the top 10. And the other guy who didn't make the top 10, but he's one of only 2 guys on this list that are still active. And I don't think there's any question that he will be in the top 10 by the time his career is over. And it's not necessarily, if he gets to 5, he's in. Again, I'm not a count the rings guy. I think it's stupid. I think there's a lot more nuance to that. I think if you get to the conference finals and you lose against a better team, or your teammates get hurt and you don't make the playoffs, or you get hurt and you don't make the playoffs, or things like that happen, using that to detract from a player's greatness is disingenuous, and I'm not a fan of it. So Steph Curry is currently outside of my top 10 because I'm not just looking at career accomplishments. I'm looking at overall basketball ability and impact. And a little bit, I'm looking at off the court. And I will say this, it is both a positive and negative. Steph Curry is one of the few players that changed the game. There's only a few that really changed the game. A couple of them are going to be on the list. On or off the court. That's not entirely a positive thing. I say this half jokingly, but Steph Curry and Kobe Bryant are the 2 players in NBA history that have done the most to hurt youth basketball. Really, go to a park, go to a pickup game, and I guarantee you're going to see some kid pull up from 30 feet if you have the shot in your bag, if you can shoot that shot with your normal form, and it's a normal shot for you, and you shoot a relatively the same percentage from there as you do from a closer 3, that's fine. Then it's not a bad shot. Make or miss, it's not a bad shot. But you got a ton of kids and older than kids and adults and people out there that see Curry, and because it looks easier to do what Steph does, it doesn't fully lodge itself in their brains that he's every bit of a freak that Vince Carter was. And Vince Carter is the greatest dunker in NBA history. Steph Curry is the greatest shooter in NBA history. No ifs, ands, or buts. I'm not accepting an argument to the contrary on either of those 2 statements. There's guys that are right below him that were really amazing, but they're in classes of their own. And yeah, Steph changed the game for good and for ill, because turns out all the people that are trying to emulate Steph are in fact not the greatest player to ever do the thing that they're trying to do. And that gap leads to a lot of really bad basketball. It's not entirely Steph's fault, but it's just that argument is definitely a double-edged sword. But anyway, Steph's an honorable mention for right now. I really think he will crack the top 10. For me personally, I know who he will replace for my top 10 when his career is over. But I'm not putting him in it for a number of reasons, but at the simple level, even though he's an incredible player, the individual greatness, individual dominance, and the defensive end, although he's an average defender now, while at one point he was way below average, that part matters as far as your total impact on the game. And the guys that are in the top 10 all had similar levels of greatness, similar levels of dominance, but a greater level of net impact and individual greatness throughout their careers, all but one of which are over. So he'll get in there, but he's not there just yet. So now let's get into the top 10, and just keep this in mind. Again, these are not in order, and I'm actually doing these in order by position. So you'll see the centers together, the guards together, the forwards together. So Bill Russell is the greatest winner in NBA history. He has 11 championships as a player coach. Bill might actually be a better human being and humanitarian off the court than he was a player on the court, which is pretty incredible considering I just said the guy has 11 championships. And yes, he played against plumbers and firemen and yada yada. And that's it is a fair criticism for most of the players in his era. Bill Russell had to guard Wilt Chamberlain. And Bill Russell guarded Wilt Chamberlain just as well as he guarded everybody else. Bill Russell was the only one who could stop Wilt Chamberlain, the guy who once scored 100 points in a game. Great players, not good players, not really good players, not okay players, great players transcend eras. Bill Russell would be great now. He wouldn't win 11 rings now because there's more parity in the league. There's more net talent. He wouldn't have such an overwhelming collection of talent on his team versus his opponents. He wouldn't have 11 rings. He wouldn't have none. Great player. And the ultimate winner, not just from a mentality and from an achievement standpoint. The MVP is named after Bill Russell in part because Bill would do whatever his team needed him to do. You need him to go get 25, he'll go get you 25. You need him to have 6, but completely stop whoever he's matched up against, he'll go do that. You need him to get 30 rebounds, he'll go do that. Bill Russell would do whatever his team needed him to do in order to win. The ultimate winner. One of the greatest players of all time, the greatest winner ever in the NBA, and like I said, an amazing, incredible human being off the court. There's a couple of guys on this list that have done incredible work off the court, which does matter. Not just being a cultural icon, but the stuff that Bill Russell had to put up with from his own fans when he played in the 60s and during the Civil Rights Movement and after it, although you could really argue intelligently that it still hasn't ended, he's a better person than me. I would have taken a chair to a fan's throat for some of the stuff that was said to him within a week. And the guy played year after year after year and never lost his cool and never lost his grace and never lost his composure. And he should be celebrated for that. But again, just strictly talking basketball, it's not just that he won 11 championships. It's that he was the reason those teams won 11 championships. And his ability to not only be the best player, but be the glue guy at the same time was extraordinary. Next guy on the list, there are 3 players that have an argument for the greatest of all time. When you're talking career accomplishments, ability, longevity, dominance, performance, total impact on the game of basketball, there's 3 guys that have a real case where you can make a case and you can set a criteria and you say, based on this criteria, this guy is the best who's ever played. And Kareem is one of those 3 players. 6 championships, I believe it was 9 finals, the all-time leading scorer, the most unguardable player ever. Kareem in his prime, they talked about the skyhook, the most unguardable shot ever. Here's the thing about Kareem and the skyhook. If you didn't know this, and you can find clips on YouTube and you can go check them out. Kareem wasn't doing skyhooks from 8 to 12 feet out. Kareem would take that thing out to 15 feet, 18 feet, and drill it. A absolute freak of nature as far as touch, balance, body control, hand-eye coordination. Tremendous winner, won in Milwaukee, got traded to the Lakers, got Magic, won 5 championships there. I believe they went to 8. Played forever, incredible human being. Originally Lowell Cinder, changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They called him Cap. Even was a pretty funny guy in the movies. I think he was on Airplane and a couple of others. Kareem is, without question, one of the 3 greatest players in the history of the game. Again, we're not going to put these in order. We're not going to talk numbers, but he's one of those 3 guys. You can guess who the other 2 are probably. They're going to come up later because they're not centers. Kareem, I really don't need to say much more than that. His resume really speaks for itself, and if you're not as familiar with his resume, go check it out. Again, Kareem is one of those all-time great players. In today's game of pace and space basketball, Kareem would still average 30, and believe it or not, the difference between Kareem and Rudy Gobert on defense is not nearly as big as you might think it is. In fact, in some ways, Kareem's probably a better defender, and Kareem ain't getting 8 to 12 points a game. Kareem's going to give you 30 or more. Um, Incredible player, could play in any era, extremely dominant, tremendous leader, end to end, one of the greatest of all time. Next on the list, I said this before about Curry. This is going to be, this really will be a consistent theme as we go through this list. Almost every guy on this list is the greatest ever at something, and then also one of the greatest ever at a bunch of other stuff. Because that's the only way you're making the top 10 of a game that's been around for 60 years now. Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon is one of the most forgotten and disrespected players in NBA history. And not by NBA historians or super fans, but by the general populace and the media at large. People don't really realize just how incredible Hakeem was. Number one, Hakeem Olajuwon is the greatest defender of all time. It's not Draymond Green. It's not Dennis Rodman, although both have very good cases for being all-time great defenders. It's Hakeem. Hakeem is the best defender ever. Like, that's pretty much an objective fact. Statistically and otherwise, Hakeem could guard out on the perimeter. He could erase people at the rim. And on top of that, he was giving you 28 to 30 every single night. And he could shoot from the mid-range. If it had been in his era, he could have definitely extended out to 3, but didn't need to. And the most skilled player on the block ever. So he's got 2 evers on his resume. Won 2 championships, went to 3 finals. Again, the greatest defender ever, top 15 in scoring. Could just hand out bucket after bucket after bucket after bucket, and there was nothing you could do about it. David Robinson, who's one of the greatest centers of all time, was a great player in his era. Hakeem got mad that he won the MVP over him, so he proceeded to absolutely annihilate him when they played each other in the playoffs. He annihilated him. That was cruel and unusual punishment. Hakeem, they called it the dream shake, what he could do on the block, finish with either hand, great athlete, underrated in that regard. He wasn't 7'2" and 300 pounds like a certain someone who'll be coming up here in a second. Although he gets, kind of underestimated too, but we'll get on that in a minute. Hakeem just flat out dominated everybody he went against. And the few truly, truly, truly great players that could compete with him, they couldn't slow him down. You might be able to match him, but you couldn't slow him down. And that was the difference. You had Rodman's defensive impact, except a little bit better. But you also had a guy who could give you 30 to 50 to 60 in a game anytime he needed to. He played in his best years were in the 90s, which was an expansion era and a watered down era as far as the collection and the distribution of top end talent around the league. There was really only a couple of teams in the 90s that had more than one high end star player, and one of those teams won 6 championships. And they had, well, actually, they were kind of like the 2010s Warriors teams, where they had a ton of high-level top-end players, and especially the second three-peat. They had like 4 guys that would have been a top 3 player on any other team in the league, and 3 all-time great defenders. So again, we're not counting rings. Why does Hakeem only have 2? Well, A, he played in the same era as Jordan, and B, he had good teammates. He didn't have great teammates. And if you bring up Clyde Drexler, look at what Clyde was at the time he played with Hakeem, and zip it. But all-time great player, absolutely belongs on the list. And speaking of guys who belong on the list, Shaq dubbed himself the most dominant ever. And Shaq's the reason Wilt isn't on this list. Shaq's our last center. Shaquille O'Neal, unfortunately, some people will remember Shaq more for being the grumpy guy who constantly brings up rings or does terrible commercials on TV, and not for being the most dominant athlete we have seen in the modern era. That includes Tiger Woods when he was on his run. That includes Nadal when he's on clay. The most dominant athlete we have seen. They changed rules not to stop him, not to slow him down, to give anyone a chance. The guy was averaging 40 in the finals. Shaq at his peak was unguardable and unstoppable. And part of what a lot of people forget is Shaq is one of the absolute freak athletes of all time. Shaquille O'Neal in his prime could run the break, could get the rebound and go coast to coast and either finish the play himself or make plays for others, especially when he was the younger, svelter Shaq in Orlando. He could do unbelievable things. That 7'2", well over 300-pound body. Shaq at his peak could move, could spin left, spin right, could finish with either hand, had a baby hook, could finish you off in the mid-range, could hit you with a jab, could hit you with a drop. By the way, we mentioned this in the show with Chris, but if you think for a nanosecond that Rudy Gobert could shut down Shaq, you never watched Shaq. Rudy needs to be drug tested. There's no one on this list Rudy Gobert could guard. Shaquille O'Neal is the most dominant force we've ever seen in the NBA. And he absolutely deserves his respect as such. Now, Shaq is also maybe the most disappointing player ever. Because if Shaq never lacked for competitiveness, but being fair to Shaq, Shaq is one of the few guys in league history that were superstars that other players around the league were allowed to pretty much foul at will and hit him as hard as they wanted, and he got penalized for being bigger and stronger than everybody else and playing physical. And that took a toll. Part of why Shaq was big, part of why Shaq played his way into shape is because he got beat up. And yeah, he was a lot bigger and stronger than those guys, but you know what? Enough ants can eat an elephant. Like, it did add up. And he's talked about it, in the later part. Some of it was also like he knew Kobe was a psycho, and so, I'll play my way into shape. When I need to be ready in the playoffs, I'll be ready. This kid will hold it down, once Kobe started to ascend. And Shaq, again, these are Shaq's own words. I'm not making anything up. But when you put him at his peak and you look at the dominant stretch he had, towards the end of the 90s, I know, they burn the tapes and no one's allowed to talk about it, but Shaq and Penny Hardaway beat Michael and Scotty in the playoffs. And you can tell me Michael wasn't Michael yet and he wasn't ready all you want, but Michael dropped 50 in the Garden that year, and it wasn't in the first round. They just got beat. That Orlando Magic team was really good until they got too cocky and their egos got involved and it kind of fell apart. They were amazing. And Shaq was an unstoppable force. He really, really was. And you can't talk about Shaq without talking about his running mate. 5 championships. The most competitive player I've ever seen play in a game. An absolute psycho. One of the only people ever in sports to give themselves a nickname and everybody just accepted it because it was great. Kobe Bryant, the Black Mamba, rest in peace. Also, the most, for me personally, as a basketball fan, Kobe Bryant is the singularly most frustrating player of all time because Kobe should be the greatest of all time. Kobe's more skilled than Jordan. I'll put that out there. Kobe Bryant was more skilled than Mike. But he wasn't better. Kobe is the greatest hot and cold player ever. He's one of the greatest shows ever. When Kobe had it going, you could go from up 15 to down 12 playing against the Lakers in 10 minutes, and it was all Kobe. And it wasn't all oh yeah, Kobe's got 24 points and 7 assists in the second half. No, 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 no. Kobe scored 50 in the second half. Like when he got it going, he would just drill shot after shot after shot after shot, and there was nothing you could do about it. And he would take impossible shots. I said earlier, the two players that are the worst for youth sports and pickup basketball in league history are Kobe Bryant and Steph Curry. And it's not because they're not incredible players, it's because they're so damn good that people watch them and they want to try to do what they did, and guess what? You ain't them. First, if you've never heard of the term, a Kobe assist is when you shoot the ball and you miss, and they get the rebound and they put it back in. Because Kobe famously would tell teammates to get it off the rim. That was how Kobe was wired. Um, if I had to choose one player in one possession to win a game for my life, depending on if I'll put it like this, if I'm down 2 or down 1 or tied, I'm choosing Jordan. But if it's regardless of scenario, like if we're including threes, you want Kobe. And the Kobe and Mike difference is like that. And if you asked players who they want taking that shot, it'll unanimously be one of those two guys. And that doesn't mean they have the highest shooting percentage in those situations, but limitless will, limitless dedication, and limitless self-belief that he could get the job done. For me personally, it was not always a pleasure to watch Kobe because I watched him shoot his team out of games as much as I watched him shoot team into games. And that was frustrating because I got yelled at for that. But again, I'm not Kobe Bryant. And playing like Kobe is a great way to get yelled at if you're not Kobe Bryant. But absolutely one of the all-time greats. Again, 5 championships, went to I think 7 finals. No, 8 finals. I think he's went to 7. Um, just an all-time great player, the ultimate competitor, and it was looking like the second saga of his life was actually maybe going to be better than the first. Died tragically in a helicopter accident with his daughter. Um, by while doing like a really good job of being a dad and loving being a girl dad, which he took a lot of pride in, which was really really awesome. So Kobe is without question on this list, one of the absolute greatest players of all time. And god damn, 3 Lakers in a row, spoiled ass fan base and organization. Seriously, Magic Johnson. Um, my personal opinion, I think the two most fun players to watch, especially if you're just looking at guys' highlight reels, the guys that have the two best highlight reels as far as just fun to watch for me are Vince Carter and Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson is the greatest point guard of all time. Another one of those evers. Magic Johnson is probably the greatest passer of all time. And when I say greatest passer, I don't just mean most assists. I'm including hockey assists, but I'm also actually looking at the art of passing. Vision, setting people up, looking people off, fakes, adding style and flair to passes, but also the variety and array of passes that he could make. Being able, like, another person that'll be on, actually 2 other guys on this list, being 6'8" or above, having access to the more vertical passing angles, being able to pass down, pass over defenders, make skip passes, but could make a pocket pass, could make an entry pass, could make every type of pass. Was the key to the Showtime Lakers. Magic Johnson was an incredible competitor, an incredible winner, an incredible player, and I think probably the game that best symbolizes what made Magic Magic and why he wasn't just a guy that racked up a crap ton of assists and triple doubles, but really was an all-time great player. And it's why you have to look deeper than just numbers. Magic jumped center in the closing game of the NBA Finals. They won that game, and Magic scored 40. 40 plus, I think. I think it was like 44 or something like that. Magic could just go and be a high volume scorer if he'd wanted to, or if he had needed to. But they had Kareem, and they had James Worthy. They didn't need Magic to score 30 a night. But if they needed Magic to score, he could. If they need Magic, what they needed Magic to do was be their leader, to be their engine, to be their star, to be the driving force behind, you know, a dynasty that won 5 championships and went to, I believe, 8 finals. And don't forget, he lost, I think, 4 years due to being diagnosed HIV positive and people not understanding how transmission did and did not work over that time. It was a while before he got allowed back in the league. Um, so who knows what he would have done over in those 4 years. You know, he's a pretty special player. And like I said, just one of the absolute most fun guys to watch ever. This is going to be probably my most controversial person on the list. Isaiah Thomas, for me, is absolutely a top 10 player of all time. And let me give you a simple reason why. And then we'll go a little bit more in depth, and then we'll move on because I'm going a little bit long here. Isaiah Thomas has a one-of-one resume in NBA history. Isaiah Thomas, as the best player on his team, has playoff wins against Dr. J, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, and Magic Johnson, which obviously includes Kareem, Scottie Pippen, Kevin McHale, and all the other great teammates. All of those guys had, except Isaiah's best teammate was Joe Dumars for offense and a little bit of defense. Okay, a little bit. He was a pretty good defender, but he wasn't a better defender than Dennis Rodman. And Dennis Rodman's an all-time great player, but he's one of the ultimate role players, very much like Draymond Green. Go stick him on a bad team, they're not going to win very many more games. You stick him on a good team, they're going to win multiple championships. The ultimate role player. Isaiah was also a phantom BS foul call away from having the first three-peat, not Michael. Before the Bad Boy Pistons won 2 championships in a row, Isaiah Thomas had one of the most iconic, incredible, gutsiest performances in NBA history when he sprained the fuck out of his ankle in the NBA Finals and played on it and scored 40 plus in a Game 6 while up 3-2. And they would have won the ring, and then they won the next 2 years. And at the very end of the game, there was a phantom foul call. Kareem got free throws. The Lakers won Game 7. Isaiah couldn't come back. His ankle was shot. The swelling went up. The adrenaline wore off. He couldn't reproduce it. They got their payback the next 2 years. But that's who Isaiah was. And Isaiah, much like Magic, partially because of the era he played in, but partially again because he was a true point guard. He was a leader on the floor. Incredibly smart player. Isaiah led the league's best offense for a long time. And they weren't winning enough. And then they changed up the roster and they got more defensive and they became a defensive team. And Isaiah still scored when he needed to. But Isaiah never averaged 30 a game. He could have. One of the greatest handles ever, a great finisher. He could shoot inside, outside. Isaiah could have averaged 30 if he wanted to. But he didn't. Didn't need to. It's not just about the numbers, especially at his position. His job was to make sure the team ran their plays and got in position and his teammates got involved and they won. And when you look at things that way, Isaiah Thomas has a top 10 resume of all time. For me, without question. And the only reason he doesn't get talked about in that vein more is because him and the Bad Boy Pistons were the nemesis for Michael Jordan. And when Jordan ascended, and then the game exploded and became global, partially because of Jordan's greatness, partially because of his marketability, well, for the god to rise, there must be a blood sacrifice. And Isaiah Thomas's legacy was that sacrifice. He got forgotten. People didn't point out Jordan didn't start winning championships until the Celtics, the Lakers, and the Pistons got old and hurt. That's not because Jordan wasn't great. It's because those were great teams with great players, and you don't win 6 championships in 8 years if you're constantly running up against great teams with tons of great players. You do it when you have a great team and you go up against good players. And that leads us into the guy who many consider the greatest of all time. He is one of the 3 players in the conversation. He's our last guard, Michael Jordan. Jerry West was called Mr. Clutch, but if they did a redraft of nicknames, that would go to Jordan. Michael Jordan is the only player. They talk about clutch genes because Skip Bayless is a moron. Talk about that all you want. Kobe and LeBron shoot basically the same percentage on game-winning or go-ahead shots. LeBron's hit more in the playoffs. That's not necessarily doesn't necessarily mean you want LeBron taking the shot more than Kobe. In fact, you don't. The point I'm making is that great players, well, they shoot more than 10% worse on those shots than Jordan does in the playoffs. Mike shoots almost 50%. When the game was on the line, you wanted the ball in Mike's hand. Mike was the most dynamic scorer the game has ever seen in his early years, and even in his later years, he was still an unbelievable scorer. But he became an incredible winner. And the difference between the two was Mike learned to trust his teammates and to play to win, not just to play to dominate. Mike could have scored 50 whenever he wanted. There were definitely years in his prime where LeBron could have averaged 40 plus. Kobe could have averaged 40 plus. Kobe almost damn near did at one point. And he had a bad enough team he could have. Mike is the greatest mid-range shooter of all time. He is the greatest closer / clutch player of all time. Period. The end. There's lots of guys that have been great at those things. There's no one that can compare to Mike. He was a highlight reel again, especially early in his career. Not that he wasn't later in his career, but his game changed. And a lot of that change came around him winning. And he had great teams. Mike had a dominant, loaded roster filled with talented teammates who fit his skill set and fit what they needed around Mike in an era where no one else was able to put that together. He had a fellow top-level star teammate in a way no other team did. As you can see in the photo here, there's the Jazz. Like I said, no other team did. I am firmly of the belief that Stockton made Malone more than Malone made Malone. And in the playoffs, that showed up a lot. When I say great players, like all-time Pantheon players, Mike only had to play one in the finals. I don't count the Magic Johnson ring. The Lakers were hurt. They were old. He didn't play Magic and the Lakers in their prime. I'm not saying they wouldn't have won. I'm just saying he didn't play them in their prime. He played Charles Barkley in his prime. Barkley was a all-time great player. He's probably the third greatest power, second or third greatest power forward ever. I have him second. But that's Mike. You probably know Mike. It doesn't need much more said. For many people, he is the GOAT, and even if he's not, like I said, there's 3 guys that have an argument. Whichever of the 3 you believe is the greatest, it's not. No one can say you can't make a good case, not without making a bad faith argument. Now let's get to the forwards. So there's 2 guys left on the list. You probably can guess who they are. Let's talk about Larry Legend. First of all, if you're pigmentally challenged like I am, Larry Bird looks more like your uncle than he does a superstar athlete. And many players made the mistake of thinking that was so. Larry Bird was one of the biggest trash talkers of all time. Larry Bird is my favorite kind of trash talk. Larry Bird was famous for telling guys, I'm going to go to that spot, I'm going to do this shot, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then immediately proceeding to do that. Larry Bird had a teammate score a Celtics record for points, and then publicly said, I'm going to break your record I think it was in New Orleans. And broke it against a great player in his era, Dominique Wilkins. Busted him off for like 60 points. Just unlimited confidence, tremendously skilled. Him and Magic saved the NBA. The NBA of today doesn't exist if Larry and Magic don't come into the league, have the rivalry they had, but also play the game the way they played it. Like I said earlier, Magic made passing cool. Magic's highlights are some of the best ever. But Larry was a great passer too. Yes, he was a great shooter. Yes, he was a good scorer. He was an if Kobe is not the most competitive human that's ever stepped on a basketball court, it's Larry Bird. Larry played so hard that his body broke down. Larry had to retire, and he doesn't have the all-time numbers that he should, simply because he played so hard that his body just simply couldn't keep up. Larry was the kind of guy who would be up 20 and would dive into the third row trying to save a loose ball just because he couldn't turn it off. And it was incredible, and it was amazing to watch. And Larry Bird and Bill Russell are the only two things from Boston that I like at all. Um, that fan base, especially sports related, those fans are beyond obnoxious. That's a personal opinion, but there's also some real fact there, and you can look up part of that fan base's reputation and know why I don't like them. But unbelievable player, all-time great. Um, Larry Legend, the legend lives on. Complete player. Couldn't get past Magic in college. Got past him in the NBA. They eventually became friends. That's actually a pretty cool story too. They did documentaries on it and stuff. But just as far as being a basketball player, unbelievable competitor, great winner, tremendous trash talker, and would just give people the business. There's a famous story. Larry Bird once walked into the All-Star game for the three-point shooting contest. Walks into the locker room and just goes, "So which of you guys are coming in second?" And then won the damn thing. That was Larry. One of my absolute favorite players of all time, unquestionably as of right now in the top 10. And the last guy is much like Shaq, a mutant of a human being. He's listed at 6'8", but he's really probably closer to 6'10". I've seen him with guys like Tristan Thompson who are listed at 6'9", 6'10", and they're the same height. 270 pounds. At his peak, probably the greatest athlete we've ever seen, at least in the modern era. Just unbelievable combination of speed, power, body balance, explosiveness, body control, everything. And the best part about him is he's going to finish as the all-time leading scorer in the NBA, and his greatest attribute is his passing. And he wants to pass first, and he's gonna be the all-time leading scorer in the NBA. Part of that is longevity, but 16, 17 straight years of averaging 25 points a game or more. Was in year 18 last year, averaged 30. One of the three guys that has an argument for the greatest of all time, King James. And for me personally, and I will unequivocally admit I am a LeBron stan. I also admit, for me personally, he's not the guy that I have as the greatest of all time. If LeBron shot 80% on free throws, he would. I think his case would be unimpeachable. But he shoots really in the high 60s. And looking at the game, it's so narrow because of the level of greatness those three guys had that to me is what puts him at number 2. But here's the thing for me that makes him truly great. At 16 years old, LeBron James was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. LeBron James went straight from high school to the NBA with the pressure of being the chosen one, the King James nickname, the chosen one tattoo, being the next Michael Jordan. No athlete ever has had more pressure, more expectations, and more detractors because of that pressure and those expectations than LeBron, and yet he's met them all, and frankly exceeded many of them. Never been in trouble with the law. The worst thing he did was he did a public announcement of his free agency and raised like $5 million for the Boys and Girls Club. The worst thing he's ever done was that. That's amazing to me. If I had that amount of talent and that amount of money and that amount of fame and power, the amount of misbehaving I would have gotten into, I wouldn't have been in the league for 18 years. So personally, I admire the guy's dedication, his obsession for greatness, but his poise and his maturity. At an incredibly young age, LeBron entered the league at 18, and here's the craziest part. LeBron was really good from his first day in the league. No one else has done that. KG, an all-time great player. Kevin Garnett, straight out of high school. Kobe Bryant, on this list, straight out of high school, wasn't good until year 3. Was like okay, but wasn't good until year 3. LeBron was good from his first game. He was great by year 3. At 23, he took a team that had no business making the finals to the finals. Had one blemish on his career, the 2010-2011 finals against the Mavericks after his free agency to go to the Heat. Absolutely collapsed. Choked under the pressure, a lot of it of his own making, lost who he was, lost the way that he knew how to play the game because of all of the mental pressure that he'd put on himself and the circumstances. And also, that Mavs team was really freaking good. Let's not discount that either. Also, Tyson Chandler was allowed to basically punch him in the air. We won't talk about that part. But that Mavs team was really, really good. And that Heat team, the top 3 were great, but they were playing Mike Bibby's courts and like McGlure at center for those teams. Dallas should have won that series, but LeBron choked. And then after that series, he had probably the greatest 10-year run that any player has ever had. Made 8 straight finals for 2 different teams. Made 9 out of 10 finals for 3 different teams. Won finals MVP for 3 different teams. Won 4 championships. And the only reason he doesn't have 7 or 8 rings is because of an incredible series of circumstances allowed for what is arguably the greatest team of all time, the 2017 Warriors, to be assembled. When Durant joined a 73-win juggernaut after he choked a 3-1 lead against them. Bitch move. And the Warriors dynasty in general. Like Steph getting hurt and having ankle problems for his first several years allowed them to have higher draft picks, which allowed them to put better players around him, which allowed them to build a dynasty. And that was the only thing it's the only reason he doesn't have, 7, 8, 9 championships at this point. And again, we don't count rings. It's stupid. Is LeBron not as good of a player because the Warriors created a better team than David Griffin or Rob Pelinka? No. No, it doesn't mean he's any worse of a player at all. It just means that they had better teams. Teams win championships. He was the best team in he was the best player in every one of those finals. Even the ones Durant won finals MVP. LeBron was the best player. If you don't believe me, look at their numbers. They're basically identical, and then go check and see which guy had more pressure and was carrying a bigger load, and you'll understand which guy was the better player. It's that simple. So, with all that said, LeBron's the last guy in the top 10. Again, not because I have him number 1. I already covered that I don't. But just because he's our last forward. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I went a little bit long. I like to have a lot of fun with these types of topics, so hope you had fun with it. If you did, like, comment, share your top 10 in the comments section. If some of these players are guys you weren't familiar with before, look them up. Hopefully it was educational. And if you hate this kind of stuff and you want me to stop making it, like, comment, subscribe, and tell me not to make it anymore, and I'll go make other stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed the show.